And the saying, that they're peacocking, or someone who's like overly aware of their good looks, right? Um, Overly aware of the beard that they're growing.
Are you aware of your beard?
It's like overly aware, right?
It's hard to miss.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Right.
Michael Steele, the peacock of humanity.
Right. Exactly. Right. Welcome to another edition of the Table of Content. My name is Michael Steele. I'm co-host, and here with me today is my co-host Albert Saenz, the wonderful, the great, the illustrious.
Albert, how are you? I was gonna say, I was like, I don't really have any. I'm Junior. I'm Albert Saenz Jr. I was thinking, I don't have another, Albert Saenz the third. No, that's my son. So I was like, I see what you're doing.
Albert Saenz the brilliant, right?
In my dreams,
right?
I am brilliant in my dreams. Thanks, Michael. Good to be here.
Right. How are you doing?
Good. Just ready to get into this because we get to talk about Aesop today. We haven't done Aesop in a while.
That's right.
So Aesop, you can always count on Aesop for twists and lessons and morals and not what you expect. And
they're deceptively simple and deceptively short. When you sent me the text, I thought, and then I read it and I thought, my goodness, what's going on here? There's so much here that we can go into, but I'm looking forward to it. So what is today's story about, Albert?
The Jay and the Peacock.
Yes.
And basically an attempt to be something you're not.
Right. Yes.
So we've got a jay, a smaller bird, who finds some shed or molted peacock feathers and decides that it wants to be as beautiful and as elegant as a peacock. So finds a way to sort of attach these shed peacock feathers onto itself, and then goes to try to make an impression, but ends up being discovered for being false.
Mm-hmm. And is rejected by both sides, the peacocks, as well as his own species, the jays, right? Both for different reasons, right? But it got me wondering about that. Well, first of all, Aesop, brilliant in terms of his ability to observe nature and choose aptly the animals portrayed, because I don't know if you observe like blue jays, but they're sort of obnoxious, right? They're pretty bird, blue jays are. And I don't know if Aesop was referring to blue jays, but they're pretty bird, but they're obnoxious. They've got this really raucous, harsh sounding call. And then they don't raise their own youngs. They lay their eggs in other birds' nests and then let the other birds take care of their eggs. And then when their baby gets bigger, they kick the birds out of the nest and then end up like being raised by a completely different species. So they're just kind of an obnoxious bird.
So it sounds like it had some bad parenting at some point. The jays needed some better parents to come in and teach them some life lessons.
Right. We need to break the vicious cycle.
It's going to be little birds. Break the cycle, break the cycle, break the cycle.
So, and then peacocks, on the other hand, are beautiful, right? They're, the saying, they're peacocking, or, someone who's like overly aware of their good looks, right? Overly aware of the beard that they're growing,
Are you aware of your beard?
It's like overly aware, right?
It's hard to miss.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Right.
Michael Steele, the peacock of humanity.
Right. Exactly. Right. I'm like the blue jay, right? I want to be a lumberjack, but it's like, I just got the lumberjack beard. That's it. I don't got the skills.
I don't know, a flannel shirt and knit cap.
There you
You
go,
could have fooled me,
right?
but I wouldn't have come pecking at you, right? And that's interesting, right? Because it's in Aesop's version, it is
Yeah.
somewhat of a violent sort of interaction with the peacock, right? Like,
Yeah.
so it says, when he came near them, they soon discovered the cheat. So they pecked at him and plucked away his borrowed plumes. And you think about it, right? And you think about what happens in society, as in human society. Humans can be pretty vicious. Unfortunately, it's unfortunate,
Yeah.
but humans
Yeah.
can be vicious when they discover something they don't approve of, especially, someone trying to be something that they're not, someone who
Right.
was basically lying,
Right.
right? And it's that's that hurts. It hurts. The person was trying somewhere, probably, we hope that, people are like, well, I just want to be like everyone else.
Right.
So they're not necessarily trying to be maliciously misleading. Some people are, I'm sure.
Right.
I'm sure of it. But
Yeah.
these other people are like, well, I wanted to be like these pretty people. I wanted to be like these fun people. I wanted to be like the group of people that everyone wants to hang out with. And
Right.
then it doesn't work out, and then they get attacked for it. They sort of get
Yes.
pecked at and plucked at in their own way. And
Right.
it's devastating to the person. So, the jay, had to first face all of that from the peacocks.
Hmm. Right. Right. Which, again, that's leads to my question. Like, what is Aesop? What's the lesson here that Aesop is trying to portray? Right. Um, is it, on the one hand, d- I think it's a popular theme right now, is that idea of, like, be true to yourself, right? Don't try to be someone else, or, like you were saying, or be a cheat, or try to put on airs, or try to strive. But I think there is a legitimate um, space for people who are trying to better themselves, right? And and then that dynamic, if they're trying to better themselves, and there's always that tension of being accepted by the community that they're trying to uh, enter into, right? Um, but then there's also the actual, like, cheats who are just kind of there, like you were saying, with bad intentions, who are just trying to deceive, right? Or they're trying to put on airs, or they're trying to be something that they're not, right? So that's what got me thinking, right? Is it that the Jay should have just been content with being a Jay and not try to be something that they're not, right? Is that the lesson? I don't know.
Well, I mean, at the end, right? The very end, there's always this classic very ending line.
Oh, right.
And it says, "It is not only fine feathers that make fine birds." And, my interpretation, right, is that as humans, it's not about the clothes that we wear, the possessions that we have, the things that we own, the places that we go to socialize or eat out or shop.
Yeah.
There's a lot more to the interior self
Yeah.
that is more important.
Right.
And I think that we see that in our Christian faith, right?
Mm. Hmm.
You know, being uniquely made, uniquely designed,
Right.
right? And knowing that the intelligent creator, God, had something very specific in mind when he made us,
Yeah. Right.
in all of our nuances, whether we're taller or shorter or a little bit bigger or a little bit smaller, or male or female, beard, no beard, all those things. It's like God designed that person in of themselves
Right.
to be unique, to be special, and not to be anything different than that person that was made to be.
Yeah.
Like,
Right.
God didn't say, "All right, so I've made you, and now you can completely change yourself."
Hmm.
it's sort of a slap in the face to God to be like, well, wait a second,
Yeah.
God made you,
Right.
and now it's up to you to
Yeah.
find that way to sort of honor that creation, that
Yeah.
process of creation that God made,
Yeah.
and to be like, it's not about all those other superficial things.
Yeah.
There's more to you than all of that.
Right. I was just thinking, well, a couple of things. Right. It's not only a fine lumberjack beard that makes the fine lumberjack. You can have the beard, but not have the skills. But I was also thinking, I received this advice years ago I think it was a retreat or a talk, but the priest who was giving the retreat said, and it was sort of a metaphor, but he's like, if God made you a watermelon, don't spend your life being sad that you're not pumpkin or that you're not orange or that you're not any other kind of fruit. Just be the happiest watermelon you can be, right? And I think that kind of points to that as well, right? The Jay, without reading too much into the story, obviously put on the feathers to try and whatever assimilate into a community that was not his own. Maybe that was because, who knows, discontent or envy or whatever. But right, the fact is, like you were saying, God made each of us a certain way, and the idea is to be grateful, to recognize the gift that is, and then be grateful for that as well. Yeah, and that's why, like, these stories from Aesop are just, this is what, 6 lines long,
Yeah, it's not that long.
But there's so much there. It's just he was able to observe something and then relate it to a real reality of that we struggle with as human beings, right? Envy or this trying to project something that we're not, maybe out of insecurity, maybe out of envy, maybe out of a desire to be something that we're not, right? That's interesting. Right. It's also a very human thing, though, because we have this self-awareness. We have this perception of ourselves, for better or for worse, right? And I think that maybe is a process of the spiritual life, is that, that humility and purification of our own self-image, and just realizing, hey, this is, God made me and God loves me for who I am, right? And I am good. God made everything and he saw
Right.
that it was good,
Right.
Fundamentally speaking.
And I mean, I think the one of the best versions we could potentially easily reference out of the Bible is the creation story. And we go to Adam and Eve, right? And being told you can be better, but like the serpent's like, you can be better if you just have this thing, right?
Yeah.
The fruit, right? And we're surrounded in society with things saying, you can be better if you just buy this thing, if you wear these clothes, if you get this procedure, if you take this pill, if you drink this drink, eat this food, go to this school, shop at this place, buy this car, all of these things.
Read this self-help book.
Right. And what happens ultimately, right? God comes along and he's like, "Hey, what's going on?" It's like, you did the thing, right? And in a sense, it's it's God rejecting them. Like, God loves them, right? And God doesn't instantly kill them or destroy them. He does banish them from the garden, though. Right? It's like, you've been rejected now from paradise because you tried to be something that you're not.
Right.
And that had a lot of repercussions.
Yeah.
And if they had just been content, right, with paradise,
yes.
But here we are, and I know there's people that suffer, and I get that.
Yeah.
But we have a pretty good life, like all things considered, if we can get the right mindset in place.
Right.
But a lot of us are not content with the life that we have, and we want that thing that we see in the ads or we hear about or we see other people having. Oh, if I just put on those feathers, if I put on those fine feathers, it's going to be okay.
Yeah.
And it turns out really doesn't make it better.
Right. Right. Yeah. As this story also points out, the Jays rejected by the peacock community because, wait a minute, you're really not one of us, and then goes back and then is rejected by the Jay community for not really being grateful or not being proud of or not being content with who he was, right? Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. It just goes to show that suspicion that the devil introduced into Adam and Eve and their trust in God, who is not jealous of his divinity and is not jealous of his power, but that was the key there. Like, oh, God is somehow jealous and he doesn't want you to be in the in crowd. He doesn't really want to be in communion with you. He's holding out on you, right? I think that's the insidious seed that he plants, right? That somehow one is not in the in crowd or one is not good enough. There's always like kind of that self-doubt or that he's trying to plant, and as a way to destroy the trust in the relationship. And then they sinned, they wanted to be like God, but without God and through their own ways and outside of God's established ways. Well, and not just outside of it, but in direct disobedience to what he said, not to do. And they ultimately reap the fruit of that broken relationship, right? And it's kind of interesting how we as human beings have inherited that same sort of relational disconnect, if you will, right? That same kind of like suspicion about God's intentions, right? As opposed to just, we have to fight against it. And that's a work of grace in our lives. But there's always that tendency. There's always, I don't know, concupiscence, I guess is the word that has been used. But anyways, yeah.
It's a the moral life is hard, and when you're talking about the devil planting those seeds, right, of doubt or even seeds of desire, right?
Right.
There's the sort of one side of like, you need to be someone different. You need to be this person. But there's also the seeds that are planted of your life will be better if you do these things which are not moral, basically. You
Yes.
venture into immorality.
Yes.
And
Right.
it's like these things here will help me, and they look like fine feathers to me, and you can go down the list. I'm not going to list it here,
Right.
but
Sure.
you can go down that list of immoral choices, and again, it ends up backfiring in the worst way.
Yeah.
And you're like, what happened? Where did I go wrong? And that was, like you said, it's the evil one, dropping little seeds here, It's like, okay, we're just gonna do a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
until
Mhm.
you sort of make a decision, right?
Yeah.
And you try to be something that God did not design you to be. God did not design us to be immoral creatures.
Mhm.
God did not design us to be evil actors in the great scheme of the world. That's not what God designed us
Right.
for, right?
Yeah.
So when we do that sort of thing, we make those sorts of choices, we put on those fine feathers.
Yeah. Right.
We're going against God's plan for us as humans.
Yeah.
And then we end up getting pecked at, we end up getting rejected, we end up having
Yeah.
to have a lot of pain
Right.
till we kind of come to God and say, I'm sorry, please give me your mercy, which God does because God actually loves us compared to the devil.
Yes.
God actually cares. It's like, all right,
Right.
now
Yeah.
let's drop those fine feathers and let's be who you were made to be.
Right. Yes. There's a couple of images that come to mind as well from C.S. Lewis. I'm thinking of the Chronicles of Narnia. There's the last battle where the the donkey and the ape find a lion skin,
hmm
and he dresses the donkey up as a lion, and then he parades around as Aslan, but a fake Aslan. And that's kind of reminiscent of this story. But then there's the other part as well, where I think it's in The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, where the Eustace scrub,
Eustace.
yeah, he's transformed into a dragon. And again, he has a lot of healing and self-growth that needs to happen. But then the remedy for becoming back to himself was going back into going into this pool, and Aslan asks him to like start scratching the scales off, but he's not able to do it by himself. He's able to get only to a certain level, but it's only Aslan's healing claws, if you will, that are able to rip off those scales and transform him back into a boy. And I wonder if when you talk about picking up the feathers of life, these things that aren't really us, but things that promise some kind of whatever, false promise,
Right.
prestige, money, wealth, power, pleasure, whatever, right? That stripping away of those peacock feathers, if you will, is a painful process if they
Right.
get really deeply embedded in us, right? But it's healthier though at the end. Like it's healthier to be a happy jay if God made us a jay, or a happy watermelon if God made us a watermelon, than it is to try to aspire to be something that we're not, right? Yeah.
I'm going to be a happy orange.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I want to be. I'm going to aspire to be the happiest orange I can be.
Exactly, right? If God made you an orange, just be the happiest orange you can be, right?
I just am a really big fan of orange juice. So,
there you go.
but that's a good point. The scene when you read it, and we've read it multiple times because we read the series every so often in our house.
It's a great series.
You sense it, right? Because it's described as being extremely painful for Eustace to have to go through Aslan's peeling off of the scales.
Yeah.
But then he's okay,
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's sometimes where we end up in our life. We're trapped, surrounded, by scales or fine feathers that aren't ours.
Right.
And to have to go back to God can hurt. It's a humbling experience to have to go back to God and say, sorry I did this, and can you help me? It's like, I can help you, this,
Right.
and now, God does not claw at us, but that interior feeling when we're having to sort of come back and, bow our heads and say, I'm sorry, Lord. It does sort of, it has its weight, it has its own pain. But afterwards,
Yeah.
there is such a feeling of relief.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, I don't want to do that again.
Right.
It's much like Eustace. I am not doing that again.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that whole idea of the fruit of like picking up those peacock feathers leads to self-alienation, right? You're not really who you are, right? And the process of healing is difficult, but when it happens, there's more of peace, right? There's more contentment. And then, up until a certain point, then you come across the next pile of peacock feathers lying on the road, right? Or
Right.
whatever, Maybe that's beyond the scope of the story that Aesop wanted to tell, but yeah.
And I think that's life, right? It's growth, right?
Mhm.
And we can hope that the jay learned its lesson. It's like, I'm not going to touch peacock feathers again. But like you said, there's another batch of feathers that we come across. You're like,
Mhm.
oh, well, those are a little different. Maybe I can pick up those. And
Mhm.
you either resist or you try them on, and you have to come back again, right? Where our life is one of continual trial
Mhm.
and getting stronger and avoiding the things that we should avoid.
Yeah.
Getting to the point where we can sort of be like, no, like I understand who I am and I know what God designed me to be, and
Yeah.
none of that is
Right.
none of the feathers,
Yeah.
none of the finest feathers that are laying around me are
Mhm.
going to make me any better.
Yeah.
you know, accepting the feathers that we were given.
Yes. Right. But there's that kind of a flip side of a scenario of a jay who sees the pile of feathers and decides it's not worth it.
Right.
That's kind of I guess the flip scenario of that, and they don't have the experience of trying to pretend to be a peacock, but then they also don't have the pain of like trying to get back to who they were. There's wisdom there in like trying to recognize the temptation for whatever vanity or ostentation as it is, and just letting it be, like redirecting and just letting it go. Yeah. Anyways.
Ladies and gentlemen, we've been reviewing The Jay and the Peacock by Aesop. And if you've gone through this whole episode and haven't listened to it, go to our website, go to YouTube, find The Jay and the Peacock. Link will be below in the description, and give it a listen to. Really, these Aesop ones, they are really short and always something to pick up from them. They're really great, and we hope that you have learned as much as we learned from talking about them.
Right. Lessons to get yourself and your children, perhaps, or grandchildren thinking about things. Well, thank you, Albert. It's been great to be with you today and to talk with you about Aesop and the lessons that we gleaned. And it's always a joy to be here with you.
Oh, always a joy on my part as well. So thanks for being here.
And thank you for tuning in and pulling up a chair by the table of content. And we'll see you on the next discussion.